Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever felt like there's a missing piece in your spiritual life? Well, today, we're exploring a text that argues a powerful ancient practice, what it calls a lost key, has been forgotten by the modern world. So let's try and unlock this idea together.
The source we're looking at today really doesn't pull any punches. It opens with this very bold claim that fasting, a practice found all throughout the Bible, is a lost key to successful Christian living, one that has been pretty much misplaced by the church today.
Okay, so just to be clear, when this text talks about fasting, it's not talking about dieting or some kind of health trend. It's specifically about voluntarily abstaining from food for a spiritual purpose. That's the key distinction.
So, how does the source make its case? Well, we're going to follow the argument step by step. First, we'll uncover what it says is the primary purpose of fasting. Then we'll see it in action in some pretty intense historical stories. After that, we'll examine a critical Old Testament law. And finally, we'll try to figure out what it all means.
So if fasting is this supposed lost key, what does it actually unlock? The source argues it has one primary, foundational purpose. And here it is. The text argues that the main purpose of fasting isn't about gaining some kind of spiritual power or getting things from God. Instead, it's a tool God provides for a very specific action, humbling ourselves before Him. To back this up, the author points to several New Testament commands, and you gotta notice the language here. Whoever humbles himself. It's an active instruction, putting the responsibility squarely on the believer to do something.
You see, it's not a suggestion to ask God for humility. The source points out that these are direct commands to do something, to actively humble yourselves.
So the command is clear. It's repeated. But that brings up a huge practical question, right? How does a person actually do that? How does one just go about humbling themselves?
And right here, this is what the text presents as the missing link. This verse from the Psalms gives us the how-to. I humbled my soul with fasting. It connects that abstract command to a concrete physical action.
Okay, so that's the principle. Now let's see how it plays out in a couple of incredibly high-stakes situations from the Old Testament. First up, we have the story of Ezra. He's leading a group of exiles back to Jerusalem through some really dangerous territory, and he faces this critical choice. Does he go with the worldly solution and ask the emperor for an armed guard? Or does he go with the spiritual solution, trusting God completely? You know, Ezra's choice to fast wasn't just about faith, it was about integrity. He had already told the most powerful man in the world that his God would protect them. Asking for soldiers would have made his faith look weak. So he humbled himself and his people with fasting, choosing to actually live out what he professed. We see the exact same pattern with King Jehoshaphat. When a massive enemy army threatens to destroy his nation, his first move isn't military strategy, it's to call a national fast. And his prayer, wow, it gets right to the heart of it. A total admission of helplessness and a declaration of complete reliance on God. So those examples show leaders turning to fasting in a crisis. But the source argues that the strongest evidence isn't found in emergencies, but in a required annual national fast. This is the instruction for the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. And the language is incredibly specific. The command isn't just, you shall fast. It's, you shall humble your souls. The source argues that here the two actions are presented as one and the same thing. And this wasn't some short-lived tradition. The source notes that for roughly 3,500 years, just think about that span of time, this practice has been a central part of Jewish observance. That shows you just how deeply significant it is. And this law was totally non-negotiable. It was a permanent statute, so well known that by the time you get to the New Testament, they just call it the fast. And here's the most critical point. Atonement wasn't automatic. It was only effective for those who actively responded by humbling themselves. If you refused, you were to be cut off from the community entirely. Okay, so we've seen the definition, the examples, and this huge national law. What's the big takeaway from all of this? The source concludes that all of this reveals a pretty clear spiritual pattern. God acts, He provides grace, forgiveness, or protection, but He often expects a specific response from us to receive it. And time again in the Bible, that required response is to humble oneself through fasting. And that brings us right back to where we started. If the Bible really does present fasting as the appointed way to humble ourselves, and humility is the key to receiving God's provision, then what does it mean if this key has been lost today? It's a challenging thought to end on.